Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Ryan Pronzinski of Christ Lutheran Church in Michigan Center, Michigan. And this is my Chair Chat daily devotional for May 25, 2020. And a blessed Memorial Day to you all, and a blessed first day of summer. I've got my bright lime green summer t shirt on today. So peace be with you. I hope you enjoy the holiday. Let's see. So yeah, these videos are intended to help you engage your life of faith during this time of pandemic, even on a holiday, or when you get to this video anyway. And so with engagement in mind, I encourage you to take time throughout these videos to pause and reflect, journal, have conversation with those around you, etc. And I also encourage you to leave constructive comments, questions, or prayer requests in the comments section below this video, and I promise that I will get back to you in the following videos. The readings that get selected each day for these videos come from the Daily Revised Common Lectionary, which is a church calendar reading schedule, and it can be found online. The readings for today are Psalm 99, Leviticus chapter 9, verses 1 through 11, and verses 22 through 24, and 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. Before I get to the readings themselves, as always, I'd like to encourage anybody out there who sees these videos to come and join us at Christ Lutheran Church for our Sunday morning worship services, which we have been streaming online with Facebook Live. The link to our videos on Facebook is in the description below, where you can either watch them live at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or after they get recorded. Also, the readings are in the description below. With the readings in mind, we go on to the first reading from Psalm 99, which reads as follows. The Lord is king, let the peoples tremble. He sits enthroned upon the cherubim. Let the earth quake. The Lord is great in Zion. He is exalted over all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he. Mighty King, lover of justice, you have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Extol the Lord our God. Worship at his footstool. Holy is he. Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Samuel also was among those who called on his name. They cried to the Lord, and he answered them. He spoke to them in the pillar of cloud. They kept his decrees and the statutes that he gave them. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, but an avenger of their wrongdoings. Extol the Lord our God and worship at his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. Here ends the reading. So after reading this psalm today, immediately I was struck by verse 8, which reads as follows. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, but an avenger of their wrongdoings. So I'm struck by this verse because there's an odd paradox, or at least it seems like a paradox to me, going on in this verse, right? So in it, the action that God is doing is answering the prayer of God's people. Specifically mentioned were Moses, Aaron, and Samuel. God is answering the prayers of the people by both forgiving, but also avenging at the same time. And forgiving is generally seen as something as merciful, whereas avenging seems more harsh or punishing. And these seem pretty different. Like on other ends of the spectrum, right? Merciful versus punishing. They don't really seem to go together, hence the idea of a paradox. But what makes this word avenging even more curious, other than this kind of dichotomy, I think that was the word I was looking for earlier, is that avenging is taking vengeance on behalf of another. Right? So the word is not God takes vengeance for God's self. That would just simply be vengeance, but of vengeance instead. So, as I have here as a question, if God is simply answering the prayers of Moses or Aaron, right, who is God taking vengeance on behalf of? I mean, obviously it can't be God's self, otherwise it would just be vengeance. So that is, God would be correcting the wrong done for God's very self. That would simply be vengeance. But with the word avenging used, God is correcting a wrong done to another, right? Another party. I'm being a little redundant here. But if there's only two people, right, God and Moses, who has been wronged, right? We just said it's not God, at least in the way it's phrased, because otherwise it would simply be vengeance and not avenging. So then that only leaves one other person, and that is the one who is praying, or Moses, or Aaron, or Samuel. So that gets me thinking, right? Could God be avenging the one who is praying for the sin they have committed by not simply or only forgiving them, but also by disciplining them, right? Avenging happens by disciplining the one who's actually praying. And what that might look like is often the best knowledge and wisdom we gain, right, is when we suffer consequences and learn from our mistakes. So might God be righting the wrong committed by a person, that is the person who is praying, by allowing the consequences of their actions to cause them harm so they can learn and grow. But not allowing, at the same time, not allowing the wrong the person has done to harm their relationship between God and themselves, right? So it's both and. So God allows the person who is praying to be harmed by their foolish actions so that they might learn and grow, avenging them, if you will, but at the same time forgiving them of the wrong that they've done toward God so that their relationship with God isn't harmed. And that's exactly what the definition of forgiveness means anyway. It's to not allow the past to dictate future outcomes, right? So what we've done in the past does not dictate our relationship with God. That's what forgiveness is all about. Hence, all this that I've just said, this paradox of God avenging the person praying by allowing them to learn from their mistakes, to suffer the consequences, right? But also being forgiven so that their relationship isn't harmed with God. We get this verse from the Psalm today. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, but an avenger of their wrongdoings. Both the forgiving and the avenging is for the one praying. And both the avenging and the forgiving are answer to prayer. Both are needed. This whole paradox, makes me think of when I got lost in Walmart as a small child with my dad and have a ... So a little story time. So I remember exactly how old I was, probably somewhere between 5 and 7, I would say. My guess is about 5 or 6. And I remember being in Walmart and walking with Dad in the store, and of course, as a little kid, you see bright, shiny things in the toy aisle or bike aisle or whatever it might have been, and wanting to wander off. And of course, Dad says to me, Ryan, don't wander too far away, you could get lost. And of course, being the little child, your impulses, your instincts get the better of you, and as Dad is going wherever Dad is going, I of course veer toward the toys or the bikes or whatever it was. I know it was that area of the store. And as I'm getting lost in the awe and the wonder of all the toys, finally I look around and I go, oh no, I don't know where Dad is. I don't really even know where I am in this store. And I start to panic. I mean, I get genuinely afraid. And I'm looking around and I'm looking around and I can't find him. And I'm not sure if I did or not, but I bet you if I didn't cry, I was on the verge of crying. I mean, I was hurting, right? I was suffering the consequences of my really terrible decision to not listen to my dad. Now, talking to my dad after this incident happened, even I think years later, he said, oh, I never lost track of where you were. You lost track of where I was, and I let you get lost so that you would learn to listen to me. And that's what I did, right? I suffered the consequences of my actions. I got lost, and I was scared, and emotionally it hurt. But then my dad saw when I was kind of at my lowest point and was afraid and about to cry, and he came and he found me. And I got a little bit of a chastisement, right? Nah, see, didn't I tell you, don't wander off. But that was it, right? The experience was punishment enough. And then my dad forgave me. And I learned in that moment not only to listen to my dad, but also that even when I messed up and I didn't listen and I made foolish choices, my dad still loved me, right? In fact, my love for him grew even more because I knew that even when I got lost, my dad would still find me and still love me. And I hope you're hearing some metaphor here as we think about our Heavenly Father, who might very well do the same thing. And that's how I hear this verse playing out, at least in my own life. So, how have you experienced the gift of God's forgiveness and love while at the same time suffering the consequences of your own poor decision making and learning and growing as a consequence? Like, how have you had a story like mine where you've both experienced forgiveness but also, suffering the consequences where you're able to learn and grow, like, a both and. All right, on to Leviticus 9, 1 through 11, 22 to 24, which reads as follows. On the 8th day, Moses summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a bull calf for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. And say to the people of Israel, take a male goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, yearlings without blemish, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering mixed with oil. For today the Lord will appear to you." They brought what Moses commanded to the front of the tent of the meeting, and the whole congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, "This is the thing the Lord commanded you to do, so that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." And Moses said to Aaron, "Draw near to the altar and sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and for the people. And sacrifice the offering of the people, and make atonement for them, as the Lord has commanded." Aaron drew near to the altar and slaughtered the calf of the sin offering, which was for himself. The sons of Aaron presented the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar, and the rest of the blood he poured out at the base of the altar. But the fat, the kidneys, and the appendage of the liver from the sin offering he turned into smoke on the altar, as the Lord commanded Moses. And the flesh and the skin he burned with fire outside the camp. Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them. And he came down after sacrificing the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moses and Aaron entered the tent of meeting, and then came out and blessed the people. And the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came out from the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. Here ends the reading. All right, Leviticus. So I want to start out by saying that the sacrificial priestly system described here in Leviticus is odd to us. I mean, that might sound like a dumb statement. Like, hearing this, it probably just sounds odd, but I just want to state that I get that. We don't slaughter animals on an altar and burn their organ parts before God. Like, we just don't do that anymore. And so this is just a strange concept to us, that this would be something that God commanded and the people did. It's very foreign to us. But what's going on here, and I'm going to get to how this is less strange, is that the priest Aaron does, what he does is he acts as an intermediary for the people, between the people and God. For as we read at the end, the people are afraid of a powerful God, right? Fire comes down from the sky. I mean, I think we would be afraid too. And this mentality of people needing an intermediary between I'm sorry, yeah, well, an intermediary between God and the people. This concept has been around a long time, right? Priests functioned this way in the church all the way up into the Reformation, for sure, for sure, for sure. I mean, the Latin Mass, the Mass was the priest acting as an intermediary. There's just no way around it. That's exactly what was going on. I mean, the fact that the service was in Latin and the people didn't even speak Latin right there by itself alone talks to like how this priest is using a special language that somehow turns the wine and the bread into the body and blood of Christ. I mean, it's all very mystical and transcendent, and not quite as grotesque as sacrificing animals, but I mean, you get the point. The priest is acting as an intermediary. Now, you might be thinking, well, we don't do this anymore, Pastor. But I would argue, in some ways, you all still allow this to happen, right? Because I'm part of the priestly class, if you will. We still function in this intermediary way in some smaller ways. Because if you think about it, every time you ask your every time you ask your pastor to say a prayer during mealtime, right? Or every time you ask your pastor to say a special prayer for you, instead of just doing it yourself. That's not to say that we don't want to do it, but there always is kind of this attitude of somehow like it's extra special if it comes from the pastor. When that happens, when you do these small things, there's still this sense of somehow like we're somehow closer to God, or we can speak better, or kind of intermediate a little bit better than you could on your own. And I'm not agreeing with this, I'm just describing the scenario. It's happened in my life plenty of times as pastor. And at the very least, even if you don't think you need someone to do this, there is this sense that you would prefer that we do it. And so it's not quite as strong as, Aaron sacrificing animals on behalf of the people to kind of please God, right? But we still have, there's still an echo of that even today. So the idea of having a certain person perform certain acts to help the people be in God's good graces lingers with us still. Just with less dead animals and burnt organs, right? All right, so that kind of maybe tries to relate a little bit of the priestly sacrificial system to today in a very stretched out long walkway, but hopefully it doesn't seem as irrelevant to today as it might have at first. But what I really want you to take away from this reading is something else, and that is that sacrificing is also an act of praise. It's an act of praise. The people, when they bring animals to give to God, because that's what they're doing, they don't bring junk, right? They don't bring junk to God. They bring their very best. That is the animal's, quote, without blemish, right? That is the absolute perfect blue ribbon animals the people have. And as people bring their best for God and the community, because these sacrifices are for the whole community, God shows up. God shows up when the people bring their best for God and the community. And God shows up in a powerful way, right? And I think that is what we can take away from this text during this time of pandemic. We have a promise of God that as we sacrifice to work together and bring our very best for God and for our communities, God will show up in powerful ways, as God has always done. And in the process, it might even humble us and cause us to fall on our very own faces, like at the end of the story. And so how can you bring your very best for the community right now, the community that you live in? Might that mean sharing some food, or making some phone calls, or saying some prayers with someone? Going and giving blood, because I know that's in high need around us. Being a volunteer at a soup kitchen or a food pantry, or somewhere where they're needing volunteers to help out. Might it just mean wearing your mask when you go out? or making masks if you have that ability, or just simply supporting social distancing, keeping your 6 foot distances. Might it mean donating to charities if you're blessed enough to have more than you need in terms of money? To charities like the ELCA World Hunger, which feeds people both here and around the world, and this is a global pandemic, or to other organizations more localized like Feeding America. I don't know much about it, but I've seen many people lifting that up, so you could check that out too. I would say go with ELCA World Hunger because I know that 90+% of the proceeds given go toward the actual serving of people with food and not to marketing and administration costs, etc., etc., etc. It's a very lean, focused non-for-profit. So check it out if you're unfamiliar. ELCA World Hunger. All right, I think that's enough to have you ponder about. And I bet you never thought you'd get so much out of Leviticus when you saw it. You're like, oh, Leviticus, isn't that all the law and begat this and begat that? And it's like, yes, it is. But we got some narrative today. I hope that's enough for you to chew on there. So on to our last reading, 1 Peter 4, verses 1 through 6, which reads as follows. And I'm actually going to get a drink of water real quick. So give me a sec. All right. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same intention. For whoever has suffered in the flesh has finished with sin, so as to live for the rest of your earthly life, no longer by human desires, but by the will of God. You have already spent enough time in doing what the Gentiles like to do, living in licentiousness, passions, drunkenness, revels, carousing, and lawless idolatry. They are surprised that you no longer join them in the same excesses of dissipation, and so they blaspheme. But they will have to give an accounting to him who stands ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was proclaimed even to the dead, so that, though they have been judged in the flesh as everyone is judged, they might live in the spirit as God does. Here ends the reading. So I'm just going to continue on with my last point from Leviticus about giving our best in God showing up powerfully. I would have you consider this. Might giving your best look like suffering for others' sake? Might giving your best look like suffering for others' sake? I have had more than one conversation with people of faith who have talked to me about how they feel that a life of faith, that is following Jesus for us Christians, is something that should always be benefiting oneself, right? That should just make me feel good about myself and make me feel happy, that there's always a sense of gain from it. But here in 1 Peter, we are reminded that one of the primary characteristics of followers of Jesus, that is a mark of the church, that is the people, and this has been true since the beginning of Christianity, is suffering. Suffering is a key characteristic and mark of the people of God and the church. And it's not suffering for suffering's sake. Let me just be clear about that. Again, I want to say it's not suffering for suffering's sake. Like, don't just go out there and look for ways in which to feel hurt and get hurt. That's not the point. Rather, suffering as a mark of the church and followers of Jesus is in order to live according to God's will, as Peter says in his letter. And if you read the Gospels at all, you know that God's will is to uplift the downtrodden and the disenfranchised. I mean, just look at the life of Jesus, right? He goes around trying to enrich the poor, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, house the homeless, heal the sick, give strength to the weak, hope to the hopeless, peace and justice to those who have been wronged and are afraid, and much more, I'm sure. And to live into any of these realities that I've just named, right, it comes at a cost. It comes at a personal cost or a communal cost to those who are trying to do these things in the name of Jesus. And as we read today, if you're spending most of your time, energy, and currency or money on doing all the things that I just said, right, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, etc., you won't have time, money, or energy to party, revel, drink, and do other self-centered and non-helpful activities. And I don't want to seem like a big party pooper, especially since it's a holiday today. But the reality is we live in a very individualistic, self-focused society in the USA, right? The idea of suffering for another isn't one that we typically like very much or lift up very much as a communal ideal to live into, right? We often try and avoid suffering as much as possible. Instead of riding our bike to work, we would much rather drive our car, even though we could probably do that, or even walk to work. There's lots of little things, right? Any kind of unpleasantness that we could sacrifice in order to maybe help save some money that we could donate to charity, or even help the environment by, using less gas and burning less greenhouse gases, travel less. Right? I mean, look at how well the atmosphere is doing right now due to all the planes not flying and cruise ships not sailing at sea, etc. Even some small sacrifices collectively by everyone could benefit the environment. The money that's saved could be given to charity, right, which could help those who are hurting anyway. It's one that this idea of suffering, at least in the USA, is not one we like very much. And that's starting to become very clear in our society today during this pandemic, because people are just getting fed up of staying in and staying apart from one another. But look at right now, in this current moment in time, during this pandemic, especially in the United States of America, at who we are drawn to the most. Who the people are that we are lifting up the most and applauding the most. And that is our frontline workers. And I know there's more than what I'm about to name, but specifically, we are lifting up our nurses, our doctors, and other medical care people, right? And those are the people who are living away from their family, intentionally living away from their family, taking care of these COVID patients without proper PPE or enough of it, in order to give life and love to someone other than themselves. Most of the time, probably complete strangers they don't even know, right? Like the Good Samaritan in Jesus' parable. And for this compassionate suffering, and that is exactly what it is suffering, we call them heroes. And heroes they are. So I ask you, people of God, followers of Jesus, who suffered for us first, to give us life and love and hope and new life, how might the church find ways to be heroic too, to suffer for our communities? Suffering, again, has been a mark of the church for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, and has created space for many people to see and know God's love for them. And that's what we're all about. If you're not about helping people experience the love of God in Christ Jesus, that's what it is to be a person of faith. And so in addition to helping other people see and experience the love of God as we suffer for them, the people suffering, right, often experience God's presence and love in profound and new ways too. And so I know I have. As I have in my notes here, after a day of lifting very heavy 5-gallon buckets of wet cement in Guatemala in order to give a family a floor in their home. And this was like hours, like 3-4 hour project of doing this, of mixing the cement, putting it in buckets, lifting the buckets, bringing it into the home, back-breaking labor. I then went back up the mountain, running uphill with kids on a mountain to play with them who don't normally have people to play with them, even though I was dog-tired physically, right? But I was never more alive spiritually. I felt the love of God in those children, and I still do thinking back on that, as I suffered in body for them. So our society tells us that partying and self-promotion is the way to go. But Jesus, through Peter, tells us that suffering for the sake of others as an act of love of Jesus Christ and God, right, is far more life-giving in the end. And I think that's more than enough talk for today on this holiday. And so I say, God bless you with the rest this holiday that you need, because I support rest and recreation, which literally, if you spell out, means recreation. When we do this so that we can get back out there and love and sacrifice for a world in need. So I hope you are recharged, rejuvenated, and ready to get back out there and sacrifice and suffer for those who are in need, to show them God's deep, deep love and compassion for them. With that in mind, I say God bless you, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.